Hi everybody, it's Melissa at CIM. We're going to go ahead and get started here, and you should be seeing my screen now. We're going to kind of go through it all, and because so much of everything overlaps with one another, we'll take questions at the end. So if you want to type them in as you go, you can feel free to do that, but it probably won't get to them right away. Everybody is muted because it's a webinar format, so you won't be able to speak to me during the webinar, but this webinar is being recorded. So if people aren't here yet and you're worried, they can always watch the beginning of the recording after it's been published, which should be later today. So I'll go ahead and get started since we have a lot of content. I am not going to be going through the release list itself that I sent out, just because the flow of the release list versus the flow of a webinar are different. So everything we'll be covering is in the release list. And then we'll also end with the potential issues that you may have since the conversions happened, et cetera, on the system, and so what you can expect to see. So the first things I'm going to show you is we set up Minnie Mouse here and for demonstration, and there's a new field in here for how do you prefer to be addressed. This is where you should put in people's nicknames, or like this one, she wants to be called Ms. Mouse, however they want to be called. This will be then carried forward onto the person-centered planning report, which I'll show you later. So that will show up there. It will not show up like in the case file selector or up here. It will not show, but it will show on the person-centered service plan report later. So that's there. There's also another field in here that is needed, the communication support needs, and this is another one that will print on the person-centered service plan. It's needed for the plan regulations. So it asks, just for instance, do they need an interpreter, special devices, sign language, etc. I filled something in because I didn't know, but for my demonstration purposes. So you would fill that in with whatever types of special support needs they need related to communication, if they have any. Otherwise, you'd leave it blank. And then in the social worker assessment, there's a new About Me field in section A, identifying information. Scroll down. There it is. So this is where you record strengths, abilities, desires, choices, interests, etc. Those will also appear on the person-centered service plan report along with those things. We've also added the person chooses to live question to the report that I'll show you later, that they'll all show up in the same area. So then I want to show you in section P, I have an example of a situation, as I find the RN, there we go, a situation that the person in between assessments or whatever, I decided that the issues no longer apply. Right now it's included on the PCFP, and I don't, not necessarily I don't want, but the person doesn't want to address these, or maybe you've addressed it in a different section because you might clean these up with the new report layout, etc. And so if you choose to say no, and this is already used in an intervention or a goal, it will now prompt you saying it's going to remove these from all goals and interventions within this assessment. So right now, when you were using this and had to change it, you had to go into the goals and interventions, unselect the issue of that section, and then you could change it to no. And now it'll automatically do that for you if you click continue. If you click cancel, then you could go manually review what they are and fix it then, but clicking continue will automatically remove it for you. Just go ahead and do that. Okay. And then in the caregiver section, we have Mickey Mouse I want to show you. And Mickey is the primary helper. And in his record now, there used to be separate frequency and task question, and they were combined. So the tasks, you would include the frequency and duration if known. You may not know it, but that's where you document any conversion. They were put, the frequency was put into the tasks record, so you didn't lose any data on that, but now it's one place for that. Then the other thing that's fun in here is we now see this copy to informal interventions button. So we now can copy this automatically into our person-centered service plan as an informal intervention, because that's where the caregivers would go. And when you click that button, it will add Mickey as an informal intervention. And you simply go in here, select which issues he's going to address. So decision-making's in there, so Section E, let's say. And it's already then pre-populates the information from the caregiver record. And also, if, for instance, I need to change these, like maybe you did this and you went, oh, I have a typo, well, I can't change it. Well, you can go back to the caregiver record and make the change, and it will automatically show up. Let's say there is no supervision, and take that out, for instance. And then when you go back down into your informal intervention, it's automatically updated here. It's gone. Okay? The other thing I wanted to note regarding this is that it always has a start date automatically from a copy, and it will use either the assessment date that you're working on. So if you filled in the assigned assess date at the top, then it will use that date. If you don't have one, it's going to use today's date. So if let me get rid of him in the informal intervention. And right now, if I go up to the next assessment, see, I have 10-1, that's why I use that date. If I take that guy out and I do the same thing, I go to Mickey and I copy Mickey, then the start date is today's date. So you want to make sure that before you start working on an assessment, the very first thing you do is put that date in, because it's going to be used throughout the application. A lot of the times, of course, it is today's date, and that's no problem. But if you're, working on the plan of care later and haven't done the assessment date, you're going to want to put that in first before you start adding all the interventions, so it populates with the copies. And then the caregiver summary has been changed as well. If you look at this guy, so it shows that as well as whether or not the record was copied to the plan. So if you're going through, you want to say, oh, did I do that? Well, you could just click here instead of scrolling all the way down to the bottom and going into the informal interventions and looking. You can see right on this summary whether or not it has been copied. And this is going to be essential for all of the different summaries that are related to interventions have this same column. And you're going to want to use that to know whether or not you've linked the records together, because you're probably going to want to go, when you do your next assessments for everybody, go in and make them linked so that they do talk to one another. Otherwise, you're going to be back to the days that you are right now or were last week, where if you put some information in, you're putting it in both the record, like the caregiver or the DME or whatever, as well as doing it in the intervention record. So if you clean that up and have them all linked so that you see it's copied to whatever intervention type it is, then you know that those records are linked, and you can just make one change all throughout the assessment as everything changes throughout time. So you'll just save yourself time later if you get them all linked up. And you'll see more of that as we go through. This is just the first example of it. Let's see. The other thing we can do is, let's go Maggie here and copy her. And then I'm looking at my notes to make sure I don't do this wrong. So Maggie here, I wanted to make sure I have this done and set up right before I mess up my own examples. So both of them right now have copied to PCSP. If you go in and delete one of them, then that will go away. So delete Maggie, and then in the summary, now it just has Mickey's informal copy. And then if we go here, the fun thing about both caregivers and community support is it automatically links them. So these guys actually are already going to be linked up for you if it converted. That's a whole other story we'll talk about later. But when you select the caregiver record, it knows who you're adding. And so even if you put in a manual intervention for informal, it automatically will link it to the caregiver record. So even though I didn't use the copy feature, it will do that because you're selecting the record, so it knows about that person. So we made it so that they automatically link for you, and you don't have to worry about that for those guys. You will have to worry about it. I got ahead of myself earlier, for DME and medical providers and pharmacies if you choose to link any of those to interventions, and I'll show you that later. But these guys will always automatically, no matter if you enter it manually or you enter it and copy it from the caregiver or community support record. And then there's something else I just lost my train of thought. I'll think of it later. So community supports works the same way, where you can click on a community support you've added, copy them. It will add it to the informal. It adds the tasks, and the tasks and frequency were merged here as well, just like the caregiver. So they behave exactly the same. And then if you go into your community support record now, you're going to see that it was copied to informal here. There's not too much information here, but that information shows. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So whatever caregiver records you had added before that converted, so you had caregivers with informal interventions, and the informal interventions did convert over because you had the names typed the same as the one above, or not typed, selected in the intervention itself. If that happened, they are automatically linked right now too. We linked them as part of the conversion to make sure that they were copied to PCSP in this column as well. So you won't have any cleanup even related to your existing data, because we did convert that for you. So either way, future and past now are linked up for caregivers and community supports. Okay. Let's see, checking where I'm at. All right, so DME is the next area I want to show you. So DME had a few different changes. One is, you'll notice that DME doesn't expand anymore here. And that's because DME is now a grid, just like medications and medical providers and pharmacies. So this was your guys' request so that they, so that you can manage them all easily and not have to click all over the place to find it. You get your one list and can update the whole thing throughout. And so this also has that copy to PCSP category in there. And it looks different for how copy to PCSP works in a grid. We have a new column, okay? And this column will change depending on what you've done. So I'm looking at my notes to see what I wanted to do. So I am going to copy the enteral formula, and I click that guy. And then DME is different in the fact that it can copy to arrange, purchase waiver, or purchase other. So if I say purchase waiver and then copy to PCSP, it's going to take me into my intervention for specialized medical equipment and supplies, etc. And then if I scroll down, you can see that it says the SME here. Now you'll notice though that it does not say anywhere in here that this is related to the enteral formula, and that's because that's handled in the details when you order that in the MICE's care plan world right now, and then vendor view service authorizations. So the details of that are handled there, and so you would enter that separately and track it that way, because these are just the main waiver services, not the individual detailed information. However, if you go back to the DME summary, you're going to see that enteral formula was what was used to copy to the PCSP. And this gets confusing because, what if I need to copy not only enteral formula, but we also got the medication dispenser? You can't copy both to purchase waiver, so it's one or the other. And you'll just have to know that, and you could put a note to yourself somewhere if you want, but you'll have to know that you're dealing with those in the service authorizations, not at the level in here, because they use the same exact service and they can't overlap in the intervention. So all the SME intervention is going to cover whatever applies for the date range it applies. So if maybe you ordered the enteral formula and that's over and done with, then you would resolve that, and then later you get the medication dispenser, then you can add and copy the medication dispenser to PCSP, because it won't overlap, because the dates don't overlap. But if more than one thing are being purchased at the same time, then you can't copy multiple. It won't let you, and I'll show you that too. So going back here, my system's slower on our demo area. Okay. So in here, the I'm forgetting my train of thought even. Oh, what it's going to look like. So once it's copied, it changes to a checkbox. So you know that that record's been copied. So you know not to try to click it again. Otherwise, it was giving you errors and it was bad. So we did this to show you could see. But these are technically eligible to copy. If you did try to do this and choose purchase waiver again, it tells you can't because it's going to overlap. So if you see that overlap, it's because another one's already there as an intervention for purchase waiver for the same SME type. So, but you could add it to purchase other if you were not purchasing, if you were purchasing it but not with waiver dollars, but I don't know why you'd have that, or it arranged. So if that, let's see, if I add this to an arranged, and and it fills in automatically that provider, so you don't have to do that. It's really nice with this copy piece. And then if you go back to your DME summary, you'll see that it's copied as an arranged in the summary once it pops up again. There it is, so arranged. And then if we go back and edit it, you'll see a check mark for that guy. Now, the other one I'm going to say is arranged as well is incontinence supplies from J&B is the next thing I'm doing. So I can, because these are different things, I can copy them to arranged as many times as I want because they are different types of DME. Now, what you can't copy is if maybe you had a DME item, let's go back here, a DME item or more than one item that had the same category but they're different things, then you wouldn't be able to copy them because the DME uses the additional descriptor as the item name and not using the additional description information that is in here. So you can't have two grab bars, even though you probably may have two grab bars of different sizes. You couldn't copy grab bar twice for the same period of time because even though this is available to delineate between the two in here, it can't do that because this guy controls what's the uniqueness of the intervention. So just so you know and are aware of that. But again, now since these guys are copied, I can make any changes to this and it's going to automatically change my interventions respectively without me having to do second steps. So if you made an error and it's not the right company, you could change that. You could change payer source, whatever. Payer source, if you change that, that is not linked up though to switching like types of interventions. It's just an additional information. So if if Medicaid is not tied to purchase waiver, it doesn't work that way. So if you change that, it's not going to do anything to the intervention. Okay. Let's see. So then next thing I want to show you is the medical providers. The medical providers is a summary as well. We've also updated this guy to have that copy to PCSP column. And we have a little bug here that we're showing this twice. It's because before in the past we had business name and last name fields. And we did a find and replace on that, I guess, and nobody noticed that it was printing twice. So we're going to get that fixed in the next release, but it's literally the same thing twice right now. But we'll get rid of that extra column now that last name is not a thing in our new provider world. So in the medical providers, you have the same copy to PCSP. However, this will not prompt you for which one it's going to. I'm getting my list here. Okay, so both of them will go to arranged no matter what you do. So because this was not the primary physician, it goes as other physician and comes down here and tells you foot care specialist. And then if I go back to my list, and I want to copy the other guy too. So I copy him, he is the primary, and so he comes in as primary physician. But both of them are arranged interventions when you look in the list, okay? So, however, this other physician, and primary, I believe, when you add extra information in the additional descriptor field, such as foot care specialist, maybe you want to say that this is for podiatry or a podiatrist or however you want to name it. And you save that guy. Then when you come down here in the arranged intervention, it replaces other physician with podiatry. So if you have multiple types of medical providers that are part of the plan, if they're not, then that's fine, you don't have to copy them to the plan. But if they are, you can delineate between the multiple others by putting in that additional descriptor so you can easily see which one it is. Otherwise, you're just going to have you cannot actually add multiple other physicians without having putting in the additional descriptor because it requires a uniqueness to it. So when you copy, it wouldn't let you. If you didn't fill in it, it'd give you an error saying, hey, it would create a overlapping duplicate intervention. So you got to put the additional descriptor in there if you want multiple other physicians to get into the plan, okay? Then the other cool thing that we have throughout that I did not do in the DME, but I'll show you here, is if we go into the medical provider and let's say that they no longer have Dr. Feelgood, okay, they got rid of him. If you delete them here, it is going to also delete the medical provider intervention. So there's an arranged intervention linked to this medical provider, and if I remove the medical provider, it's going to automatically remove the intervention. Same thing in the DME. Anything that's linked as a copied record and you delete it, it's going to ask you, oh, do you want me to get rid of it there too? So that's a really nice feature. It doesn't actually save it until you save it though, so make sure you save, you're not done. But when that goes away, then your arranged intervention, your other primary physician that we had in here is gone. Okay, so that works for DME medical providers and pharmacies, which I haven't shown you yet. So pharmacy is very simple. So pharmacy, you know, it's probably rare that a pharmacy is going to be on the plan unless they're doing the actual things for the person. Maybe they offer some type of service that the person's using, I don't know. But you can copy that to an arranged automatically. It's the only type it can go to. And so the pharmacy's there for you and fills in automatically the provider and phone should you need to do that. So, and there it is listed there. Okay, so then I want to show you, so I've showed you all this copy, and that's how you can keep everything linked up, but you can, when you add a new arranged provider right now, I'm just picking something, doesn't really matter. I want to show you the different fields in here. So the provider type has changed to expand upon the new agent provider list we have that I haven't shown you yet. But in the agent provider list, you get to say what type of provider it is, and it's a multiple choice. So this provider could be an arranged medical and pharmacy, I don't know, but I do know that if I select one of them, it's then going to give me a filtered list here. So it's just my arranged, the providers I said were arranged, or if you change it to medical provider, it's just going to be the providers that you said were medical providers in the drop-down. So really all this is doing is saving you time in finding a bigger list by making it smaller here. So this just helps you select the arranged thing. So you don't have to say everybody's an arranged provider or everybody's, you know, whatever. You could choose the one that they fall under most commonly and use it that way should you want to know that it works that way. So Dr. Feelgood, when I choose Dr. Feelgood, it fills in the phone number, and now I know that he's providing it. But it's not linked as a copy. Other, you type in your stuff just like you're used to today. Let me just go back here. Okay. So this is, you know, my intervention is food. just because I picked a medical provider doesn't mean that it's linked to that, because the intervention is actually this thing, not below. So the only way they get linked is if you copied it up above, unless it's caregivers and community supports, and that guy automatically does it. Okay, so the other thing I want to show you is in purchase waiver, we now have some changes to the SC intervention. And one thing that is not happening is we are no longer doing that automated text here that said, you know, monitor, la, 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 something. That's not there anymore. So you do need to type in what intervention you're performing. And then we've got the communication plan. And it's expanded based on your guys' request, as well as now these are number of days, and they are not text. And these also, if there's a purchase waiver intervention, first, it looks to that to see what the interval is, and that is what causes the due dates on all the various things. So the contact, the monitoring contact, the assessment interval, and the PCP planning meeting. So all of these control that. They have mins and maxes each. You can't go beyond, off the top of my head, I don't know what they are, but we've talked about it in the past. So they have min and maxes, so you can't do anything crazy, or the person can't ask you to do it daily. You won't be able to put in one day. Every day they want you to call. But those guys are there. We do recommend that you use, if you want the typical patterns of the person's like, yeah, I just want to go with the usual of the PCP meeting at 180 and assessment annually. Because of how the PCP is every 180 days, and the assessment would be then 365 point something depending on the year, or average per year, that you would end up having to have another PCP meeting overdue by the time you did the assessment. So we said, no, the assessment max in here is 360 days. So you lose 5 days that you could have had in the past to calculate the due dates, just so that you don't get off on that. If you do choose different intervals, though, you will have varying due dates, which is fine. And the PCP, the assessment counts as a PCP meeting, so it resets the PCP to do item based on the assessment as well. Same thing with the contacts. The contacts every month, if you do a PCP meeting, you do not need to enter a separate monitoring contact, because that PCP meeting is your monitoring contact. So it automatically does that for you. In the calculations, it resets. Same thing, assessment, same thing. You don't need to do a monitoring contact in the when you're doing an assessment within the same time frame. Now, if the monitoring contact is due 10 days before your assessment, then probably you may have to do your monitoring contact, or better yet, do your assessment sooner, and then you don't have to do the extra work and contact them twice in the same month, unless you need to. I mean, that can happen too. But so anyway, those all control that way. Then we did change this question around, and we did it because it was mentioned to us in the feedback for the report that the wording of that question didn't match up to how it was presented on the report. And so we reworded the question so that it would match what the report says and make sense. So a lot of you are going to need to go in here, if you've got this set up already, you're going to want to run this report and look at these responses and adjust this data accordingly. Because it's now asking, who would you prefer? And before it was, I think it's would you prefer was before. And so people said no or NA and things like that, and you want to take that out, because you want to leave this completely blank if there's no one else that they'd want you to communicate with about the services supports other than themselves. So otherwise, and then that won't print on the report. Otherwise, it's going to say NA. I would prefer NA to contact or be contacted about my service and supports, and that'd be really kind of funny looking. So you're going to want to really pay attention to any reports you generated from this point on the PCSP report to make sure that it makes sense, and clean up things that don't because of these changes that have happened. We also added these two questions of whether or not you want a copy of it mailed to the primary or any other physicians, and if yes, who, and then the other preferences are still there and print on the report as they do now. There's one other thing I want to mention. Oh, okay. So We did change the max here is 360 for the assessment, but we are not changing the open status interval of assessments for 365, and that's because that 365 is actually being used by other programs and that have nothing to do with waiver. So we're going to leave that guide there, but honestly, once you fill these in, the assessment interval that is in the status record means nothing. So it can be whatever the heck you want it to be. So if you put 365 in there, fine. It's not going to use it as long as these guys are filled in. If it's not filled in, then it's going to use the open status interval instead. So what it does is it looks for an assessment due. It says, oh, do you have a purchase waiver SD intervention? Okay. Do you have a communication plan for this set? No? Okay. If not, then I go, oh, do you have a purchase other SD intervention? And do you have this filled in there? No? Okay, then I'll use the open status assessment interval. So it goes with those, so it checks both of those purchase interventions first, then it goes to the assessment interval in the open status record. The other thing too to note about this is that for waiver participants, anybody that's got waiver anything, waiver I, P, A, or not A, there's no waiver A, waiver D, whatever, it's going to automatically calculate the first reassessment due in 90 days. Doesn't matter what you put in here. So you do not need to put the 90-day amount in here. You're going to put the amount that's going to be ongoing after that. So the first 90 days is automatically going to do for an assessment due, and then after that it'll go to whatever you've got set here. So we don't look at this at all, or the open status interval at all, for the first reassessment. And by first reassessment, I mean in this episode. So the episode is set here, so it's based on whatever assessments are listed in here. So I don't have any right now, so mine will automatically calculate when I finalize it in 90 days, and it won't use this 180 I've got here. Okay. The other thing too is you are able to now clone these interventions. And by clone, you see there's no copy or anything like that. It doesn't work that way. But let's say that I'm, working on the next assessment with the person, and she goes, yeah, you're calling me way too much. I don't want to talk to you that much, okay? And so you need to make a change to the communication plan. Well, what you don't want to do is change it back to the beginning of time that this is set for. What you're going to want to do is end date this guy and start a new one to change those intervals to whatever their new preferences are. So for ease of use, you can now click the Add button. It's going to automatically assume you're cloning the one you're selected on, and it has an option, do you want to carry forward the information from this purchase waiver intervention, and prompts you for what start date. So if I say, for instance, and I click Add, what it does is it copies everything I had before, see, and then I can just make a change and say, okay, we're going to go 45 instead, give them that much, okay? But it preserved this old one in here with my original, and it has a resolve date automatically of the day before this one. And this can be used in any of the purchased interventions. Primarily, the biggest reason is the SC, because there's just so much content in the SC intervention compared to the rest because of this communication plan. The other ones, it may not be so useful. So you got to pay attention when you add on anything, because it's going to think, if you're selected on any of these, it's going to think you want to clone. If you don't want to clone, which you don't have to, or you're not meaning to, you'd need to switch this guy to whatever service you're trying to do, if it's not the same one. And then it automatically takes out that cloning piece because it doesn't apply. So just beware that it's going to auto prompt you for the one you're on, and you'll need to change it. It won't be no selection like you're used to seeing now. Now, if you're clicked up here and you click Add, you're going to get the no selection because it knows it's brand new. So it doesn't matter that you're in here. It just know that, pay attention that when you add, when you're already in here, change this guide just like you would if it was brand new anyway to whatever you need it to be, and do that. You will note too that community transportation is here. There's no longer the separate NMT and NAMT ones in here, and they were merged. So you'll see that in your conversion. when you go into your records, if you did have people with both. I think there was maybe 4 records in the entire system that had both. So those merged, everybody else, it just updated to community transportation. The other thing, though, that we want you to be aware of is a lot of you use the SC monthly performance script to know about timely assessments. And it could get easily out of whack and be wrong, the report, because we don't know, or because when we calculate the next assessed dates, it's always based on whatever's in the next assessment record, okay? It is not based on any dated assessment. It's what's current right now. So this is the latest one here. So I'm using these communication plan questions here. That's what it does. However, if, because you may, if you know, and these are archived on assessments, right? So each assessment, you see the difference. But the script is not fancy enough, nor do we take enough care to pay attention to the old past things. So I couldn't tell you without, you know, from the system at least, in that query, that you changed the interval in between assessments, and I am only looking ever at the next assessment. So if you're running the report back in time or things changed in between assessments, like for the person-centered planning meeting, for instance, you're going to update the plan, you're going to go through here and update whatever needs to be updated, fine, but you're not going to finalize an assessment, which is correct because it's not the full assessment. And if you change the communication plan intervals at that time, there's nothing to tell me that, you know, electronically exactly of what it was due at the time that it was due without doing a lot more effort. So we recommend that you do not, if you don't have to, don't change the communication plan questions in between assessments. I mean, hopefully it doesn't. If it needs to, it needs to, but just don't make it general practice that you're changing them always on a PCP meeting and not looking at it at an assessment, because it's preferred to use the assessment so that those reports will give your managers the right information. So we just want you to be aware of it. It's not something you have to do. It's just, it will be a problem if that is a commonplace happening. So, and then that report's kind of useless in that regard. So just a warning on that guy, because it's changed completely differently than what it was in the past. The other thing too is the SC monthly performance script was updated and it's available, but it doesn't have the PCP meeting on it timely yet. We didn't have time for that quite yet, so it's not there. It's just the monthly contact or monitoring contact, sorry, and the assessment intervals, and the we plan to add that later, but we did do scripts for the next PCP meeting due if those, for those that aren't using the Compass Next part and want that report, it's available through the script, as well as next monitoring next contacts due, it's called now, for the monitoring contacts and when they're due. So those scripts were also added out there for you. All right, I think I've got some questions in here. I'm going to pause a minute and see and make sure these are addressed. Oh, yes, that's telling me that I didn't mention about the default dates in the SC. So if you don't, because the assessment interval is controlled by open status, but monitoring contacts and PCP meetings don't have anything else in the system to set those. So if you did not add an SC intervention or do not have the days put in the intervention for the monitoring contacts and PCP meetings, and it's a waiver client, it will default to be 30 for the monitoring and 180 for the PCP meeting automatically. So those people that you may have had converted that they didn't, you know, you didn't clean up the text into numbers, it's automatically going to have those for the programs it applies to. I think monitoring contact actually has a few more programs than just waiver that applies to. I think care management and targeted care management, et cetera, is in the, it's in the user guide of what all that stuff is that counts that. Okay, we have a question about Section C was being flexed out. It is kind of, and I'm glad you pointed this out because I totally forgot about addressing that. Section C is still here, but it's just the questions that apply to all caregivers. So in a formal helper status, this is about every single caregiver as a whole, so it cannot be an individual caregiver question, as well as the total number of hours and the strong supportive relationship. So Section C is still a section, but what got flexed out is all the primary and secondary helper questions. Those primary and secondary helper questions are now in the individual caregiver records. This is some of them here. I'm going backwards, but so there's your ADL or areas of informal help and willingness questions, and then obviously, you know, lives with person, is here, relationship, helper type. So those questions are now there, but you do still have a Section C for the totality of them, these questions represented. So it's not, it isn't completely gone. So thank you for asking that question. Getting lost of where my questions all went on my screen. Let's see. All right. Ugh. Thought I popped it out, but it went away. Okay. Do you need to change the reassessment number of days to 90 after re-enrollment? If you did not close the episode on a person that, you know, the whole episode, not just to put the status to waiver I when they go into a nursing facility or something, and then then it resets. You have, I'm not sure if the 90 days applies on a re-enrollment. You might want to check on that. I'm not positive, because if they were in the nursing home, you automatically will get prompted to reassess them within 7 days of them returning from the nursing home. So I think that trumped the 90-day thing, and it just continues after that point on the regular interval period, like anyone else with 180 PCP meeting and you know, a year for the assessments. I'm pretty sure that's how that works. I swear I remember a conversation with Elizabeth about that. But you'll want to double check that. Yeah, because the system will not automatically calculate 90 days after re-enrollment. So if you do want to do that, then yes, you would have to change the SC communication interval to that in the next assessment. If the first reassessment is 90 days, is the second 90 days after that? No, the second would be 180 days after that, or no, 360 after that. 180 days after the reassessment would be the PCP meeting, and then another 180 days for the assessment after that is how it's calculated if you're waiver. Or whatever the SC intervention is, I should say, not necessarily if waiver. So if you have an SC intervention and those days mean the 90 happens, and then it's 180 past that 90, because it's always based on the last finalized assessment. So you finalize an assessment, that date gets used for the next one to come out for both PCP meeting for the 180 days after that, and then the assessment after that. It's a good question. I haven't covered that one yet, so we'll come back to that. Cloning interventions for arranged or informal. Okay, so if you need to make changes to arranged or informal because of the changes to the tasks, and date stamping those is the question. That is an interesting question. I don't think that's been thought of before. So if, for instance, Mickey no longer does one of those things like I just did, and it's in between assessments, then yeah, you may need to date that record. I'm gonna have to follow up with that one, because right now it's not a dated task in here, but you may need to if it's in between assessments, and then because that controls the intervention description. So I'm not quite sure. I'll follow up on that one. Thanks for that question. I lost the context to that one, so I'm not sure on that one. CLS hours change. Okay, no, CLS hours is handled in MISIS. So if you're changing anything related to the in-purchased interventions, nothing having to do with the vendor, the hours, the cost, the actual service itself, has nothing to do with the intervention. It has everything to do with what is put into MISIS for the service orders. We did notice that there are some supports coordinators out there putting in the vendor information and the hours, et cetera. That should not be included in here. The only thing that gets included is if the person has a preference about something that is not dealt with in MISIS. The service summary report is available to you as part of the, service summary is part of the PCP report as the federal government thinks of it. So the service summary is where all of that information is, and that is coming from the MISIS service orders that get put in that explain the vendors, et cetera. So anything on the service summary should not be duplicated in here. So you could easily get cited if you have conflicting information in between the two. So it was decided in the design of all of this that participant preference is for things that are not covered in the service summary, the vendors, authorizations, et cetera. And it could be things, you know, like, I don't even know, but things that you want to remember, you know, that that you need to know about that aren't covered in other things. So a lot of the time, this probably is going to be blank because it's most of the stuff that participant preference is dealt with in the service orders. I mean, even like insure, for instance, if they want a specific flavor, you're going to put that in a note to the vendor for the order. So that would be all handled over in that world. Okay. All right, so I think I've got through everything I have covered so far. There's some other questions in here I have not covered that are coming up yet. So I'm looking where I left off. All right, self-interventions, we have not covered that one yet. So self-interventions, right now, if you had put in informal interventions and it was the person's name, it got converted to a self-intervention. That this wording right here would be the person's name still because we had nothing to use to go with anything else. So for those that you had added self-interventions to, you're going to need to come in here and clean up this text to change the intervention name to what it actually is for this left panel. So this self-intervention is they're going to eat less junk food because they want to eat healthy. Minnie's not feeling so good because she eats too much junk, okay? So that's her goal that she's set for herself that you can't really do anything about. So that's an example. So otherwise, this is a pretty simple self-intervention, just intervention description of, you know, to be further about it. Note that you always want these interventions to be short because they need to fit here. If they're in, so you do not have room, nor are we going to expand this field to have any more than it is because of it being a short, little, quick, easy reference wording. The real information is going to be in this description, okay? And then you can select issues if it's addressing issues, et cetera, as you would anything else. So that's nothing too exciting. Okay, now the fun part, the report. So PCP report. Let's go look at this guy. All right. So the report is different, very, very different than what you had in the system now. Most of you have probably seen this in the QA demo we had. It does print up here the preferred method of communication, you know, who your sports coordinators are, prints that information there. And about me, I prefer to be addressed as, shows here. This is the I choose to live. I didn't put an actual about me in there. So it's just printing this guy. Here's your communication support needs. So that has its own little box. Express goals of care shows up here. your communication plan. So here's your 45-180-180. This is the I prefer for my sports coordinator to communicate with, and then it fills this in with whatever text you put in. So this is where it would look goofy if you say none NA. So make sure you don't put that kind of language in there. You do only what applies so that this prints correctly. And then my other preference for communication are, and then it just prints whatever it is in that field. So that's the first part of the report. Then we go into tasks I can perform. So these are the self-interventions. So eat less junk food. This is the description behind it, and start and stop date. Minnie Mouse, this was a conversion one. So if you see something like this, you got to go clean that guy up. That's bad. Informal supports provided me. So these are going to be your two caregivers and their information. Then your community supports. So there's Donald doing his little tasks he's doing as a neighbor. Then it goes into the arranged services giving you assistance. So these are all our arranged interventions, okay? And you can see that my podiatry shows with a colon here, as well as durable medical equipment show which ones they are. I didn't put descriptions in any of them. The providers and their phone numbers automatically coming from the copied ones at least. My choice services in my home. So these are your purchase waiver interventions that are coming through. So this is the generic, because remember the service summary is the has the rest of the information for the specifics on this, and it shows you those, and then it goes into the issues. So it's split up by the different domains, categories, and it goes with my important issues, cognitive patterns, and I had typed in the include on PCSP, if yes, why, or briefly describe, etc., need for reminders. So I typed that guy in cognitive section E. I had identified a goal, safety decisions and reminders, had tagged section E as the issue, and it's more important to me, and the desired outcome from that goal. Then the other thing we did is that you'll see to be determined in here if we did not identify an intervention to address that issue. So what that means is that cognitive patterns is missing. So if I flip over here and to see this, I can see in my intervention summary, I have a missing section. So these guys are all missing having an intervention added related to them, okay? So this would be your things that you'd want to clean up to get rid of that to be determined language, okay? So that's how you'd fix that. Unless, you know, there's nothing yet and it really is to be determined, so there you go. So then here comes, in the clinical section, we have continence and skin condition start, so it just keeps going with a new little box for each issue, and I didn't identify anything really. And then I'd also said the summary, social work summary should be included on the PCSP, so that's printing along with my intervention of the default language for that shows here. And then other goals. So these are other goals that I had put in that are not related to an issue. So the stay at home, eat healthy, desired outcomes. I don't want to go to a nursing home. I want to feel good and need thicker liquids to swallow. So that's why the enteral formula, etc. And then the signatures, if you had marked the PCSP, SW, and RN as complete, which I'll show you in a minute, then those user IDs that click those complete buttons will print up here with their credentials. And then the rest of it's their regular signature page. So let me go show you how this works. So I hope I have everything filled out enough. I think so. So in here, the two check boxes of these, there's been a change now to allow you to check these even when you're not working on an assessment. So your PCP meetings, right? You're not doing the assessment, but you're doing the PCSP updates. And you want a copy of the report with your signatures, as well as that report needs to go to your vendors. And so there's a new vendor view notice that is sent to the vendors when both of these boxes are checked. So I am going to check both boxes. Yeah, I'm missing data, I know. Lots of it. So Hopkins H did this, so if we rerun that report, it can be both. And you scroll down, oops, so you see Harry Hopkins MSW, okay? and so on the date that we checked it complete. The other thing is over in here in vendor view, refresh the page. So right now I didn't have it. Now I have PCSP updated. Why I have two, I'm not sure, because I might have done something. Oh, I did. Oh, I have two different vendors. Good call. This is why I'm not the only one in the room. So each vendor that's involved in the case will get the PCSP updated notice. So good call. So I have two for that reason. So each of them get a notification of the PCSP updated, and they check the box. They get the same report you do, of looking just like this guy. Okay. So that's how they get a copy of the report at all. So they can get that without an assessment if you mark those two things complete. The other thing is these are not required to send the assessment notice. You saw in vendor view there was also a new assessment notice sitting there, and that was because when I was playing with my setup, I had already checked these guys from pharmacy up, and when those guys get checked, they send a new assessment notice to the vendor. But it does not require these guys, and as such, the PCSP report is not tied into the report bundle that an assessment notice is. If I run this assessment, it's not only going to give me the assessment report, but it's going to give me the caregivers, medications, the backup plan, and medication. I said medications, caregivers, medications, pharmacy, and medical providers. There we go. So those are included, but not the PCSP. The PCSP won't go until these guys are checked. So just so you know that that's how that guy's working. Okay, that's all I had for the report in that part. Okay, so now just I make clear that you do not need to put this date in to check those right now. You did to get it to go. You don't anymore to get it to go. So when you make changes to the PCSP on your PCSP planning meeting, right, and you're done with those changes, then you wouldn't fill this guy in. You would just go down here, click these two buttons. That sends the report to the vendor. You can get your report. At that point, you may choose then you want to save that report and upload it as an attached file to the record. So you have a record of what got sent at that time, because there is no historical signed report in the system, excuse me. So that methodology, we've talked about that on previous calls, but of however your agency decides to handle that. But you do not need to put that assessment date in order to get the signatures on there, to get the report, and to get it to go to the vendor when it changes. Okay, I have a few more questions I'm going to look at right now before I move on to the other things. Can interventions be added without attaching to an issue now? Yes. The way the system works is you add the intervention first, and then you select the intervention. So the issues, I'm sorry, select the issues, not the intervention. So I select the issues here after I've added the intervention. And then if you look at the summary, you can see those that are missing an intervention for issues that need to be selected. So it shows there. Now, if you've already picked other interventions to use these, you can also see here that you didn't choose an issue for the intervention because these are blank in these columns below. So you know right away that you didn't pick the issue because this last column is blank on all these guys. So the only one I actually selected an issue on, which showed in the report as well, is the social work summary. All the rest of these guys need issues added to the intervention. If it applies, because I don't know, there might be circumstances that wouldn't apply. Somebody mentioned that editing the to-do items in the monthly monitoring note has been lost with update. I don't know what you were able to edit before on that, because their system generated to-dos, unless maybe the reminder date, but if you would email the specifics into the help desk, then we can take a look at that. That we didn't do anything on purpose, I can say that. Somebody asked if there's a section for other goals not related to issues. Does that mean we do not need to have issues for each goal? Does that mean we don't have to have issues for each goal? For it to show up on the report, that's true. As for policy-wise, I can't really answer that. But the system will print them, and it's there. I don't know when, there might be cases that that's true. I don't know that for sure. I just know that the report will print that way if you don't select issues. So, because in the past it wouldn't print at all, and that was bad. Whoops, I accidentally deleted somebody else's because I clicked too fast. So I didn't see that one. So if I haven't answered your question besides this one I'm covering in 2 seconds, then let me know. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is in the case key display, we are now showing up here the Guardian DPOA of yes, as well as hospice. These are being controlled by the caregiver records. So in each caregiver record, it asks the legal relationship questions. So if you say yes to either Guardian or DPOA to any caregivers, it's going to print yes up here. And if you add a hospice intervention, which let's just go do that. Well, we're going to do this life, huh? There's some weird stuff in our QA, and I hope it's not production, but we'll find out that sometimes you have to refresh the panel for the add button to show back up. So let us know if that happens in the real world, because we can't get it to happen here all the time. Oh, no. Oh, wait, no, I lied. Now this is the other problem you're going to have, because I do this all the time. I lied. See, this is why. Yep, so I completed these. They're locked down. Good. System works. Go unlock them. Ay, ay, ay. See, now I can click add. There you go. So we're going to add hospice now. I almost lost my train of thought. I get all turned around in here. I hope you guys don't with that. Because you said you were done, so you shouldn't need to do any more. Yeah, so you're demoing it. Anywho, so I add hospice here. Then it says hospice yes up here. If you want it to show, though, on the, where is it at? Is it on the PCSP report that you have to choose a provider? I can't remember. But choose a provider regardless on hospice things, and then everything is fine and dandy and shows up where it needs to show up. I think it is the service thing in the PCSP report, whatever. So hospice is yes here, and then the other thing that we've added all of that to is the participant detail info button, and it shows actually who they are. And if you have multiple guardians and multiple DPOAs, it will show another new line for each one, because we're not going to make a guess as to which one's right and which one's wrong, or maybe they all are right, I don't know. Then hospice is also printed here with their phone number for a quick and easy reference here. So those have been added here. I think that's the only changes to that guy. Okay, so that's where that stuff comes from in the new release. And all right, let me just check questions before I move on again. Okay, so this guy did. All right, so somebody asked about DPOA Guardian questions. Should it say yes only if activated? We don't have a question about it being activated or not. It doesn't exist. So if you don't want it to show up if they're not activated, then you, for the caregiver record, the active as a DPOA or active as a guardian, that the legal activity has occurred, that part is not tracked in the system. If that's something we need to look at doing, we can do that separately. I think we've asked this before, and most people said no. And I don't know if you want to handle it that you don't mark them yes, so you maybe mark them pending because you're pending it becoming active. I don't know. But we don't track anything regarding to being activated, so we don't know that. So we use, if you say yes, then it shows up as yes up top. Okay. Somebody asked, this is a good question. So once the PCSP, SW, and RN checkboxes have been clicked to generate the signatures for the plan, is there a certain amount of time that needs to occur to allow the plan to send to the vendor before unchecking? The most recent, be unchecking it until you go to do your next assessment. So that should give plenty of time for the vendors to have gone in and done their thing, unless, of course, they call later, but it shouldn't be within hours that you're unchecking it. You shouldn't uncheck those 2 boxes until you need to change the plan again. So if you have no need to change the plan, those just stay in place as checked and signed until you do it again. So that should not be an issue. Okay. Somebody asked if the communication plan for SC for assessment is annual, but the open status is different, then that is okay. It is to the system. I don't know about for auditing purposes, but 365 and 360 would be considered the same to us. But I think, honestly, I take that back. I lied. It has to be okay if they differ, because it's all about participant choice. So if the participant wants to be assessed every 250 days, then that's not going to match to any assessment interval we have in the status. And you're required to put an assessment interval by the software, so therefore that just becomes it's a system issue, and I would not worry about them being different. The only time I'd maybe worry about them being different and getting audited would be if it is an available option and you didn't change it, but I wouldn't worry too much about that because it would, it's not really a big deal. So for instance, if you had said 90 days and you didn't put a 90-day interval in, or 180 days and you didn't put a 180-day interval in. So I would try to make them match, but I don't think it's necessary to make sure they're exact, because it can't be in many cases where the participant chooses a not regular time frame. So that's a good question. Somebody asked if it shows if you select pending. I don't know. No, it doesn't. So yeah, if you mark pending on the DPOA or Guardian, it does not show. So so that's because it's not yes. So okay. All right, I'm going to move on to progress notes. Okay, so in progress notes, we have the new PCP meeting type. And this PCP meeting type, person-centered planning meetings, I'll spell out in here like it should. When you add one of these is what controls the to-do item. So that guy, once you've added it, then your to-do item is now updated to be within the interval of the SC intervention or the default of 180 days if you didn't have a SC intervention. So this guy, since I put in 624, I guess 180 days is 1221, and this is where you would record any notes about that visit, etc., like you were doing already. But that is how this to-do gets updated. This to-do also will get updated with when you finalize an assessment, because an assessment is considered you're doing the planning meeting at the same time as the assessment. So those two things trigger this guy to change. In here is a new field for stop date, and this was added actually more for the transition navigation. If you're have added episodes for transition purposes, then you wanted to have a stop date to track the time, so you know if it's been 8 minutes or what. Some other people were using duration. You can use either or, it does not matter to us. It's just available to you should you want to use that methodology for tracking time in progress notes events. The Nifty Notes has that same thing, has been added, actually both of these, for those of you that are using that. And we're going to be creating a script and report to pull that data, because that data can be used to then know what to post bills for in MISIS for the transition navigation, and then you run the script, you paste it into the spreadsheet that we provide with the script, and you can send that to the state. I know a lot of you are doing manual spreadsheets to the state, which is fine for now. The transition and expenditures spreadsheet is what I'm talking about. and it's fine, but eventually you're going to need to convert over to putting it into MySys because of nifty claims. So those of you that aren't aware of that, there is if you post it in MySys, MySys will report then the bills automatically, and you don't have to fill in that spreadsheet manually if you handle it through MySys and run the script. So it would be probably faster. It just requires, more people going into the MySys system to do that. So as also I'll mention right now too is that we did add a new transition navigation program status. So now those of you that open episodes, especially if you're doing episodes with another waiver agent that you're working together because maybe they're moving to a different location and your transition navigators, across the state from the waiver agency, then the transition agency can put in transition navigation as an episode and collect the information they need to do the bills and MySys, et cetera, under that program because it's allowed to overlap with other statuses. So that's been added, so that makes it easier. The only thing you cannot do is you cannot have transition navigation and another status in your own agency. One of them takes primary, which I would assume waiver would take primary. So you'd have to figure out, whatever method you're using now probably would be what you continue to use on that. I'm looking at my notes. Okay. That's it for progress notes I was going to show you. Looking at questions again. Do we have to go back to our last PCP meeting progress note and change it? Okay, good question. I think we've got this in our potential issues document I'll be going over in a few minutes, but if you have meetings that are late, you cannot go back and change it, but you could add a new progress note to replace that, and you'll want to change your that note, date, time at the top in here to be, let me get this out of my way, to be the new date and time, or not new, I'm sorry, the original date and time that you did the PCP planning meeting, and choose, that, because we'll know it's a late entry, so you'll also want to mark why it's late, and you say, due to system not having the ability to track this, yada, yada, I'm entering this late, but that will be expected so that your to-dos are timely. I know a lot of agencies just did assessments during this whole period of time instead of PCPs per se, so you no longer have to do that. If you're one of those agencies that have been doing 180 days assessments, you could change now to do annual assessments and do PCP meetings in between, and then track them this way. So yes, that's a good question. All right, now I want to show you agent providers. So agent providers is listed in our agent-specific data here, and this is now going to be your full list of all of your merged providers. So from your DME to your medical provider to your arranged provider and pharmacy providers, they're all in one list now. You're going to probably find a lot of duplicates in there that you're going to want to clean up over time because the names weren't exact matches. If they were exact matches, we merged them for you, not based on case sensitive, but yeah. So, but we found like there was places that added the extra word of home health or cares on one and not another. So those guys didn't get merged because they weren't exactly the same. One thing I want to mention, if you are a person that is going to be maintaining this list, okay, and you do not see it under agent-specific data, it's because you didn't have access to the old arranged providers list. We used that one to control who this one was because back in the day, everybody that used the system had access to medical providers, pharmacies, and DME providers. And we decided, you probably don't want to go clean up everybody that should no longer have access to this anymore, and instead just use the ones that were doing arranged providers because those ones were newer and came on just for the people that needed it as they needed it. So if you don't see it and you're supposed to have access, then you're going to need to contact whoever in your agency does your user account permissions to give you access if you need it. You do not need it to do case file work. You only need it if you need to come in here and you need to add people or edit the main provider information or clean it up, et cetera, if you're that kind of person. So just so you know, you will not see it if maybe you saw medical providers in the past. The other thing I should have shown you before I left here is in here there's the CCAP OT assessment. This is an optional assessment that was added because of the Grand Valley research study for waiver. And so it's fairly simple, and it's sections here with the data from the CCAP OT assessment. So you can collect it here, and then this then will get reported to Sandy Spoolstra and Monica as part of their research study if you are collecting it. If you're not, that's fine. I know some people are not doing that part of it and others are. Okay. All right, so next I'm going to go through the potential issues document with you. So you'll see that there's in here, notable issues are the little dots, the bullet points, and the boxes are action items, okay? So some of it's just information, like I can't edit the provider list, just what I just talked about. You don't have permission. You needed to have the arranged provider add change permission to convert to the new list. Duplicates in the provider list. You're going to want to use the new merge providers function. I didn't show it to you because it's very simple and just like the existing one today in the Compass Assistant. And it will, the good thing about this now is it automatically is going to delete the bad one. I put that in quotes because it's really not bad. It just was the, you know, the one you chose not to keep when you merged them. So it's automatically going to do that for you. Right in the old system, you had to go manually delete it later. And most people didn't realize it wasn't deleting, so it was still left over to get used again later. So it was not fun. Providers not active. You're going to want to review your list for people that you have currently that you may have put a Z or X in front of the name or say delete or something like that. And you now can, if they've never been used, you can delete them. If they were used and they're no longer active, you can uncheck them as active. And so then they won't show up in the drop downs anymore when the users are doing the drop downs to the sports coordinators, that is, are using the drop downs to do medical providers and stuff. They won't be there anymore. So you'll want to do that to get those lists to be filtered down for them. It'll save time. Informal interventions, if you're missing any, it's because those were on the list to get fixed and that we had mentioned with our script that wouldn't convert. So you needed to have the caregiver or informal support selected or be the person's first and last name to convert to a self one. So if you're missing stuff, it's because it didn't get converted, and you'll need to re-enter it for like your next assessment. Self-interventions, these are two action items. This we talked about needing to change the intervention to the actual intervention because it's the person's name right now. If multiple interventions were included in one, you can split them up now because you would have put the person's name in and then put all of the tasks in the one description box. So now you can split them up as part of changing the name. Caregivers, there were multiple caregivers with the same name, but they weren't exact. So you're going to want to fix those. I found quite a few. You know, some you'd put the junior or the initial or Dan versus Danny, things like that. And so you're going to want to clean those up because they didn't match, so we couldn't merge them in the process. Helper type could be missing. Those were things where you had two primaries, two secondaries, or the SW helpers in Section C were different than the caregivers helper types, so we just removed it. So you're going to want to review those helper types. Missing data entered in Compass Go. If you didn't sync prior to the release or made changes before installing the patch, because all Section C helper-related changes were not synced after release and patch installation. Those got lost on purpose. That was another thing we had mentioned before. So if you had done any Section C helper-related changes that would have converted, we did not deal with that in a Compass Go sync thing. So then in assessments, if you don't see the social worker Section C questions regarding helpers, because those should be entered in the caregiver now, so those are gone and flexed out on purpose. They are automatically filling behind the scenes. You don't see that, but it's needed because of the NRAI stuff and exports to them and to the state for the data warehouse. So those are still happening, but it's being automatically configured based on the data in the caregivers. Arranged intervention and changes made to the DME provider in the assessment, but it's not showing up in the arranged or purchase intervention. So you made some change in the DME and you're like, hey, it's not in my DME intervention. Well, because you just don't have them linked right now. You need to delete the arranged intervention or purchase for DME, and then use the copy button to copy it so that they're linked, and then you don't have to do the double entry. And then same thing, if any interventions for DME, medical provider, pharmacy, you should probably delete that in the next assessment and use the copy of PCSP so that they are in sync from this point forward. And you can tell if it's been copied or not because of the summaries show that. So, other arranged interventions that were added in the past now have other 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. in the additional descriptor field. So you're going to want to update those to reflect the intervention more specifically, just so you know, because we're now allowing multiple other arranged interventions, but they had to be unique, so we added the 1, 2, 3, 4 stuff to it. So it doesn't make as much sense as it probably did before this release. In the SC interventions, if you find your communication intervals are blank, if you did not make them just numbers before the conversion or they were outside the allowed intervals, then the data was removed. So you'll need to re-enter anything in there that's missing. Some agencies are concerned there would be a significant increase in the number of goals required, but there shouldn't be issues for each section. So the point of this is the same issues can be addressed in multiple parts of the assessment. So instead of including them in each section of the PCSP, only use one in like the cause issue, the original thing, that the main thing that causes this. So for example, if the issue is pain, that could trigger lots of not normal flags all over the assessment, even though there's just really one issue causing it, because, you know, we've got questions asking different things that are all related somewhat. So you would do, for all the issues marked no for including PCSP, you should just make a note that this issue is being covered by in another section and state that section. So for pain, you're probably going to want to deal with that in section J, but maybe they're not climbing stairs because of the pain. So in section P, you're saying, well, they can't climb stairs due to the pain, and so I'm including that with pain in section J's issue. And then you'd only have one goal for that issue. I mean, you can always have more if they have something else that they want, but that will reduce documentation and redundancy all over the place on the report. So make sure that you're trying to incorporate things more and not just double entering things all over the place, because that will it'll make yourself a really long report. The PCP meeting to do, overdue PCP meeting to do item, you're going to want to check the meeting interval in the SC intervention if it exists, and otherwise, because it's default in 180, make sure that's right. So that's the first thing to check. If it's right, then you want to enter a progress note with the note date time as the date that you actually conducted it in the past, indicate why it wasn't late, and that will reset the to-do item's due date. If the due date's incorrect, check the PCP meeting interval in the SC intervention. If prior to conversion it didn't just have a number, it was outside the allowed, then it defaulted to 180, so you may realize that needs to change. And that also applies to the assessment and monitoring contact to-do items. So if you're saying due date's incorrect, you go right to the SC communication plan in the next assessment, the latest one, and that's the guide that's being used to control the to-dos. And then I'm not going to go through this, but this is all of the changes to the stop dates that we did for PCP goals and interventions, this release, to make them much better, and copying forward to the next assessment, etc. So those are all things that you could see and things that you want to look at since this release, and we'd appreciate if you shared it with everybody that does these things to reduce the number of help desk items that we're probably going to be having over the next few days, because there's just a lot in this release, and a lot of conversions, a lot of changes for everybody, and I can't remember that I did something, so we're going to get them anyway. I'm not worried about that. But if you can pass along information, then that would help us out a lot. Questions? Okay, so section C, it talks about the informal supports being burned out, and whatever you mark encompasses all informal supports. How do we answer this when only one is feeling burdened? I think you would just note it, and then note in your description of conditions noted above, you would note what that is and why. And so as long as you cover it with the comments, that would make sense. It's just those questions weren't really individual caregiver questions. We could talk about making them individual caregiver questions in the future, but the ones that were the problem children were the other one. Okay, so somebody also, that's a good question. The issue report's now gone. Yes, The issues report had many issues. Funny, huh? But yes, both of those reports are gone. The issues report was way too long. This report, then there's a new, well, let me get on an assessment, because that's not going to help me. The new PCP report is here. That is the only report in the system. That is what you're going to use for everything. There is no separate report for you versus vendors versus the participant. It's all one report. So, and then there's the quality assurance report, but these shouldn't go outside your office as far as I know. There's the limited one, which is the one you're used to seeing. And then the full one is looking at not just the limited one was looking at including PCSP questions that you said no to review to make sure you really mean no. And then the full is saying, I don't care what you put in including PCSP, I want you to see everything. And that was requested by the QA staff at your agencies to help them find problems. And some sports coordinators wanted it too, to make sure that everything's tidied up between the comments and the include on PCSP information. Okay. Any other questions? We also had sent out a known issues document with the release notes. Please also pass that along, because there's a number of things that were mostly cosmetic or things that we didn't think was going to happen enough and that we could deal with the consequences as they come until the 319 release that's scheduled for August 21st. So that's out there. We're not going to go over it now, but there's that. There's also the user guides have all been updated. We put a lot of information in there for your reference. So if you have questions about how things work exactly, it probably better goes through that than even listening to me. So use that. All right, I've got a couple more questions here. Can we take out the preferences in the PCSP report to make it shorter if there are none? You would take it the preferences, I'm assuming you mean the preferences in the purchased waiver and other interventions, this guy here, that guy, yeah, if you leave it out, then it's going to be smaller. I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to per se. Let me look at the report here. Oh, I had it up already, but oh well. You mean in here? Because that's my preferences part. I mean, yeah, but that's only, right now it's one line besides this guy, so it really wouldn't do too much in that guy. So, but it's a column, so you can't get rid of a column if it's present for any of them. So if that's what you're talking about, then no, because we'd have to keep that column in case they show up later. Okay. All right. After a goal or intervention is stopped and the stop date's entered, can it then be deleted at the next assessment? If you stop it in the next assessment, when you finalize that next assessment and the stop date's before that assessment date, then it will not clone to the next assessment anymore. Right now they were cloning, I believe, into the new one. Yeah, I'm getting shaking heads here, yeah. This is where I get all muddy for me. So before it did clone it, it doesn't anymore. And if the stop date was after the next assessment, or the assessment date when it gets finalized, then it will continue to remain in the next assessment, and should, because it's really the next assessment is supposed to cover from the last assessment up to the new assessment date that happens the next one. So that should still be there. So you shouldn't have to delete anything unless it didn't get end dated and it should have got end dated, if that makes sense. So you'll have to play with it, see what that's like when that happens in the future. Okay. I got a question about the NIFTY status, that there was supposed to be something in addition to the current status. No, the only thing we did was add a new program status for transition navigation. So if you have, and that would only be applicable if you don't have an episode for another program in your agency at the same time. This particular agency, you may want to check with some other staff, because I thought that they had a resolution for that already to work with. So I'm not certain on that though. But no, we did not. There's nothing that you can do to track transition navigation and waiver at the same time, or transitioning navigation and care management at the same time in program status. If the only other thing that you can deal with that is you use your NIFTY selector to know who your NIFTY people that you're working on transitioning are, because those are listed there. Until they transition, and any services after that, then it would kind of not show up. So until the new NIFTY portal release, that's a whole nother ballgame, which is not for quite a while yet, so unfortunately. All right, I'm not seeing any new questions that have come in recently. Okay. All right, well, thank you, everybody, and let us know if you have questions or issues, and emailing the help desk would be preferred, but we do understand if you need to talk it out, because sometimes that's really the only way to get everybody on the same page. So we will talk to you soon. Thanks.